Thank you, Professor Szilágyi. First of all, a big hello for every participant of this conference. Thank you for making possible to have an occasion to present our researches with the possibility also to receive the printed book. It's not always the case when we speak about a topic that you have also a possibility to read the complete results of the research. So my ambition was in this section of the book to make a research which will have the subject matter, for its subject matter, constitutional framework for the national minorities in these 8 East Central European countries. So the basic ambition was to make a research to analyze with the method of comparison these constitutional provisions, but not only to describe these provisions and find their content properly, but also to point out the challenges in each constitutional system and the common challenges created by the so-called nationality issue in these East Central European countries. To find out what is common in these countries, the common approaches, and what is maybe specific to these constitutional systems, and what are those unresolved issues which are still present around the position, status, and protection of national minorities in these countries. Before I elaborate some of my conclusions and results around the concrete constitutional provisions and concrete constitutions, I would give a short remark about the history of this problem and about the main challenges faced by countries in this region. We can freely say that historically the nationality issue or the minority question or the minority issue is among the hottest topics historically in this region, and primarily from the beginning of the 19th century and mainly in 20th century, it was the cause of very fierce conflicts, very fierce changes, political changes in the region around this issue of minorities. And of course, the whole problem has its reflections in constitutional solutions. So the constitutions are framed partially as a result of these demanding, challenging issues that I called minority issue. And what is on the core of this challenge? So we have, from the beginning of the 19th century, the spreading of the idea of popular sovereignty, the spreading of the idea of nation state, the spreading of the nationalism in East Central Europe. And the whole idea the whole idea behind the nation state is to have a nation which is the bearer of the sovereignty. And in whole Eastern Europe, the notion of the nation is very much with cultural and ethnic elements. So in Western Europe, it's not always so, but in our region, when you say the people or a nation, it usually means also some ethnic elements, cultural elements related to traditions, language, related to religion. So in this respect, the idea of nation state means that you wish a state where the nation and the state is overlapping as much as possible. So it means that those who are favoring nation states are engaging in nation building policies, which will create more homogeneity. The problem erases that on the ground, the social reality was different and still different in many places. It means that large parts of the state, which has an ambition to be a nation state, has a diverse population with minorities, with separate and different tendencies. And this is usually creating tensions and sometimes conflicts. And the constitutional framework has the ambition to reflect to this challenge in a way. So when I analyzed the constitutional framework, I had always in mind that you have on one hand two ambitions. First is a nation-building ambition to create more homogeneity, which is in conflict with the existence, the mere existence of different nations, minority nations living on the territory. And on the other hand, you have the ambitions of protecting equality and human rights of all in these countries. It means that you are recognizing and protecting diversity. So you have two conflicting constitutional values, usually in these states. The one is to create as much as possible a nation state with strong state-bearing nations, a titular nation. On the other hand, to protect diversity and recognize diversity. And minority rights are about recognizing diversity and sharing power. So the most challenging and most interesting thing in my research was what are the answers of the state to these challenges. And we find out different answers, but also common solutions. Because the protection of minorities generally has two dimensions. The first is the so-called human rights dimension, where the basic goal is to have full and effective equality between all citizens, all groups in the citizens. On the other hand, it's also a security issue. And this security dimension was also something influencing the whole constitutional structure of protecting diversity and protecting minorities. So, how to determine the position and status of minorities, national minorities in the constitutional framework? On the one hand, with the provisions on the protection of minorities, the rights, minority rights, the group rights or group-specific rights, how are they stipulated in the constitutions? What is their position in the constitution? But there are other provisions which are also important to determine the approach of the constitution to the minority issue. One of those things is whether the minorities are recognized in the constitution, whether are they identified in the constitution, and whether the position of minorities determined by the constitution with the position and the relation to the state is determined within the constitution. Of course, we have also provisions on the state-bearing nation, the titular nation, and their relation to the state. It is also important to determine the position and status of minorities. And finally, we have also provisions which are serving nation building. And it's also interesting to see what is the position of this provision and what is the content of this provision. When I compare these 8 constitutions, I concluded that all constitutions recognize national minorities. So it's not a question for these constitutions whether national minorities are part of the state or they are recognized as a collectivity. They are all recognized. So in all 8 constitutions. but under different names. The terms are different from nationality in Hungary to national and ethnic groups to national minorities. So the approach is different in autochthonous communities in Slovenia. Only two constitutions are identifying which are the concrete national minorities. The Croat, which is identifying in the Constitution 22 national minorities, and the Slovenian, which is identifying 2+1 national communities. All others are not identifying in the level of the Constitution which are the national minorities. Some of them are identifying the national minorities in act of parliaments, others are not identifying at all. So they are not defined who are national minorities. Only the Hungarian and the Croat constitution regulates the relationship between the national minorities and the state, that they are part of the state. So both constitutions emphasize that they are part of the sovereignty of the state. They are state-bearing also in a way, so the national minorities. Other constitutions has no provisions about that. So what is the position of national minorities within the nation state? Because all these states are nation state with titular nation in the name of the state. What is also interesting, what is the position of the state-bearing nation? So usually the state-bearing nation, according to these constitutional provisions, is determined very much by ethnic and cultural elements. But we have also some contradictions in formulations about really how to understand people or nation. But generally, it is recognizable that it is the majority. The nation is the majority, the state-bearing nation. Except the Czech constitution, which is not recognizing any special position to the Czech nation in any provision. All other constitutions are recognizing in preambula or in normative part of the constitution a specific position of the state-bearing nation, a dominating position or specific historical rule of the state-bearing nation, the organic link between the state and the state-bearing nation. It's also interesting that we have some provisions related to the protection of the parts of state-bearing nation abroad in almost all constitutions except the Czech constitution, and that we have provisions in most of the constitutions on the official language, which is a very important tool of nation-building policies in all nation states. The second part is the longest part of my paper, is about comparing the provisions on the rights of national minorities. Yes. So if we compare these constitutions, we can recognize substantive differences. What is common? That all these constitutions recognize minority rights. So the individual minority rights are recognized in these constitutions. The right which is recognized in all constitutions is to declare and to protect and express a specific identity. So this is recognized in all 8 constitutions, that this specific identity is protected and you have the right to express this specific identity and to declare this identity. In the case of other group-specific minority rights, we have a differentiation. The most common right, which is present in 6 constitutions, is the right to mother tongue education for the members of national minorities. It's present in 6 constitutions, and also to establish minority NGOs or minority associations. So these 2 rights are the most common. The largest number of provision and largest specter of rights is recognized in the Serbian constitution. 12 articles of the Serbian constitution is specifically devoted to the very different rights of national minority. Almost all rights recognized in the framework conventions are elaborated, and even more, some of them are not present in the framework convention. The Slovenian provisions are also very detailed, and a very large spectrum of rights are recognized, and the Romanian constitution is also to this respect broad with rights. What are the differences? The collective rights for self-governance. To form a minority self-governance is recognized, for example, in three constitutions, in the Slovenian, in the Serbian, and in Hungarian constitution. In 5 constitutions, you have the guarantees for the representation of minorities in national assemblies. From 8 countries, in 5, you have such guarantees. So this is what I really established about the constitutional provisions guaranteeing minority rights. And what is also important, all these rights are regulated and implemented through the acts of parliament. So all constitutions are giving discretion, a wide discretion, to national assemblies how to protect and how to implement these guarantees. You have one guarantee or two in 2 constitutions about the acquired level of rights or the minimal content of protective rights, but generally we can say that's a very large margin of appreciation for national assemblies how to provide these rights. Finally, because I'm short of time, I put some emphasis also on practice, because we have the notion of law in books and law in practice. And in East Central Europe, it's a common problem that what is declared in constitution and laws is rarely, implemented in a proper way. So we have all these monitoring mechanisms recognized that there are problems with implementation. I analyzed a bit the framework convention mechanism through the advisory committee. For all states, they give at least yellow cards because there are problems with implementation, not so with the legal regulation. And I specifically analyzed the practice of constitutional courts, because the constitutional courts has a very important role in to determine the content of constitutional rights, the relationship between the minority rights and other individual human rights. What are the limits? Where are the limits? What is the specific relationship? So this is exclusively to the Constitutional Court. No one can do something like that. And I established, unfortunately, that the constitutional courts, except some bright exceptions, were not really able to conceptualize minority rights and their position within the constitutional framework. They usually, if made one step, then made one step back, and they have no clear answers to these, tensions between homogeneity and diversity, between the preferences and privileges of the state-bearing nation and national minorities. So they have no enough capacities or no enough braveness to do it, and this is one of the unanswered things in this constitutional relations. So it is my conclusion. I have the analysis of the most important decisions of the 8 constitutional courts as well. And where is the implementation? So the concluding remarks are that It is a long-standing problem of these countries and constitutions to establish equilibrium, balance between nation-state with state-bearing dominant nation and constitutional rights of national minorities. The constitutional texts are often not absolutely clear in this respect. Therefore, the constitutional courts has this very important role to conceptualize this relationship. And also it's a kind of conclusion that the provisions on group-specific minority rights in Constitution are often more a reflection of international circumstances and pressures and not a genuine constitutional development. This is also something which hinders, makes the proper answer heavy to this question. So the minority question is not in the region, not primarily a human rights question. In many states, it's still trapped to the large extent into the historic legacy. This is my final conclusions. Thank you.